our third segment is we got this lovely interview lined up with a rank and file member of the United Educators of San Francisco. We're going to be talking a little bit about some of their efforts to organize in terms of their union, the recent strike drive, sort of the internal contradictions within the labor union, the struggle to get a contract, the struggle against scabbing. And it's going to be a great conversation. I'm really excited for y'all to tune into it. Good morning. We're
Good morning.
recording this episode on March 14th, 2026.
Hmm.
Saturday morning. It's also Mexican New Year, if anyone's interested. Um, so we wanted to have this discussion to talk to a member of the rank and file of the United Educators of San Francisco. This has sort of been our sort of update follow-up piece about their historic strike they held last month. And sort of just wanted to talk more with the rank and file about how this strike movement developed. What was y'all's relationship like with strike leadership? What was some of the things you experienced during this strike? And how do you think this strike creates the basis for further struggle in the future? Or does it not? What are some of the big issues you see moving forward, as well as some of the positives of this strike movement? Before we get started, it might be useful just, you want to just introduce yourself, Nyka, a little bit for the viewers.
Hi, I'm Nyka. I'm a special education teacher. I specialize in moderate to severe autism. I work in a Title I inner city middle school.
Thank you so much. We're glad to be having you
Yeah,
today.
I'm glad to be
Awesome.
here.
Awesome. So, how long have you been a part of United Educators of San Francisco?
I just started teaching in this district in the fall, actually.
Okay, so your first year in the district happened to be
Hmm.
their first year strike in almost 40 years.
Yeah,
That's
though
serendipitous.
I personally wouldn't consider that other strike ours. That was when we were kind of a separate union that was just the teachers. Now our union also includes all the substitutes, all the instructional aides, and things like that, which is much better because it's good to have the scabs inside the union. So
Mhm, mhm.
we're a
Right.
continuation, but it's kind of a different organization to me.
So with this strike movement, they've actually expanded the unit to include those people. Those weren't involved in the unit pre last year.
Well, not last year, but there was a strike in the 70s that they were not included in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just to understand the point. Okay. Awesome. So maybe just take us a little back, further back to maybe the beginning of this fall year, and so maybe just talk a little bit about what was some of the conversation in your union about the ongoing contract and sort of how this negotiation or round of failed negotiations led to a strike. Just walk us
Mhm.
through that a bit.
Yeah, so the messaging we always heard from the union, and honestly, it was pretty well reflected. I like to say I trust my union leadership because the evidence is there. Is the district was completely unwilling to bargain in good faith. They had the rule that any concession they made had to be met with a concession on our end. I don't personally believe this is good negotiating strategy. They also left plenty of non-monetary items on the table even before the strike. They were unwilling to allow us to expand our sanctuary program for students. They were unwilling to allow, we have a program where homeless students and their families can sleep in schools overnight. They were unwilling to discuss that, like even before monetary issues. So that with I think it was a 0.5% raise that they offered. I believe that they have personally kind of engendered the conditions for the strike themselves, which is not something I think you always see. Um, so yeah, the union itself was just getting more and more militant. You can see that with a lot of our early strike votes were like putting up Saddam numbers, 99%, 97%. So I think there was just a large scale radicalization due to the bosses kind of directly antagonizing us.
Yeah, they have a tendency to do that, right? By being so tight-fisted.
Mhm.
So maybe walk us through a little bit about more so how the mayor's office sort of got involved, because some folks who may have been following from the outside have heard a little bit about Daniel Laurie and his attempts to sort of quell the workers. So maybe can you speak a little more on that.
So this is really interesting to me because very clearly Daniel Lurie has very little political experience and obviously not a lot of experience dealing with unions. He only called our union president 8 days before we were beginning to strike. He's had months to talk about this. We've been very upfront with what our plans are. They've just wasn't on the ball, and his requests are, "Hey, I know you're planning on striking on Monday. Can you just wait 3 days for some more negotiations? Can you just get back to work? I'm offering you nothing. Just do this for me." So I think it was a very politically naive like gesture from him that kind of something I would expect, and it's kind of something I think the district is also kind of familiar with it, that they're just, as unions die off, unfortunately, the political powers that be just don't know how to handle this anymore. This man had no experience, so he just thought he could call us up and say, "Hey, can you just wait?" So beyond that, he did start showing up to negotiations personally. I don't know what he had to say, um, but I don't think it was anything super substantive.
Yeah, I think, it's actually pretty indicative of just how quiet things have been just in general, right? The
Hmm.
fact that they don't even offer a carrot, right, with trying to get people to wait. I think it's because, for the last 40 years, that's all it's really taken, right?
Yeah.
Like leadership has been so able to, or rather the powers that be, the bosses have been so easy to just, cow the union down
Hmm.
with sort of like these piecemeal negotiations. They actually don't have many other practice tools outside of that. Those tools have always been effective. But as soon as there's a little bit of militancy, you see how people start getting confident, which I think is like the larger point, because we live in a society that doesn't have as nearly as a strong labor movement as say anywhere in Europe or anywhere in any other developing country. But we see how quickly actually folks can gain experience once they start recognizing a little bit of collective power, and how even just sort of the momentum of that is pretty difficult to co-opt or cast aside, at least so openly, right? Because I think was it 5% raises they were agreeing to. That doesn't keep up
Hmm.
with doesn't even keep up with inflation, right?
No.
Essentially asking the workers to agree to a more gradual wage cut, if anything at all, right? So it's
Hmm.
pretty obvious why, like, actually organized militant workers wouldn't accept just waiting 3 more days. 3 more days to do what, right?
Yeah.
So interesting. So yeah, maybe if you could talk a little bit more about how like preparing for that strike went, particularly on your school site, and maybe some other things you heard about others that could also be
Hmm.
helpful. Just how we see how this movement sort of developed from stalled negotiations, attempts to co-opt and totally derail, and then how did this actual strike? How did it take off?
So we had the original strike verification vote, essentially the vote to allow the vote to give the power to the president to call the strike. We have weekly union meetings at my school. I believe a lot of other schools also have them during lunch, so everyone can attend. We have several very, very militant and very, very kind of active strike captains at my site, so that was very helpful. They were going to each and every single person to get us to sign on board. We had a practice picket. I think every single school site in the city had a practice picket. I enjoyed it. It was, I think, a lot of it just to like kind of get people used to the concept of marching around. There's a lot of older teachers, they get tired, but kind of just showing, even kind of, I don't want to say the lumpen, but the people who are super jazzed about it. Hey, we're just going to be walking around outside for 2 hours and then we're going to go to an event. I think there was a lot of good intentionality, especially towards parent groups. The union was very, very aggressive in courting them. And I think it's by the numbers we had turnout for our rallies and our marches, we were able to pretty well engender them to us versus the district. So I think union outreach has been pretty exceptional recently, which I've been quite proud of. I still see posters all over the city for it. So,
Yeah. Could you speak a little more about rallying parents? So I think this is a big piece that folks may not are very curious about.
mhm. So obviously, there's a lot of rules about us politically messaging our students. Like, we can't tell them how to vote. We can't have a lot of political imagery in the class. Uh, Recently, they have been trying to a coworker of mine at a different site was asked to remove a shirt that just had the outline of Palestine, things like that. So it was a lot of direct outreach. Like, I personally talked to several of my students' parents about it. We were sending flyers home. We had the parent teacher organization was fully on board and actually quite militant themselves. So I think there is just a lot of good communication directly towards the parents that bypassed the district's messaging because they send very formal business emails. I don't assume parents read all the time versus us as a very personal plea. I like to think people thinking about their teacher, their children's teacher quite a lot. We're not quite like your doctor, your dentist, you're someone you have to trust. So I think that does engender kind of when we directly reach out to you about something important, it usually works.
Yeah, I think that personable connection always beats an automatic email blast every
Yeah.
single time, right? The ability to actually have a conversation and talk about the issues in a reasonable way. People are reasonable. If we approach them reasonably, they can
Mhm.
also reach reasonable conclusions that, if the educators aren't treated well, the students can't be treated well, and vice versa.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I know there's some discussion that I heard at least out in the media and whatnot around the issue of scabbing. And
Mhm.
so, with maintaining a proper picket, a proper stoppage, that's also an issue that the workers have to contend with. Is like, how are they going to deal with the bosses potentially bringing in scabs that are going to maintain these school sites operating or whatever sites of production they may be,
Mhm.
and continue on business as usual in a modified capacity. Can you talk a little more about how what scabbing looks like for
Sure.
teachers, and how y'all dealt with the scabs in this phase?
Mhm. So before I get into that, I want to kind of emphasize, even though we're, a public sector union, scabbing is super important to the district because every day they don't provide instruction, the state fines them between $7 to $10 million a day. That is, our demands are only around 100 million, I believe. So after 2 weeks of striking, if they can't get scabs, it's all pointless for them. So scabbing usually takes the place of, substitute teachers and bringing in, outside help. Usually they'll drop the sub-certificate requirements. So they'll bring in kind of really, really shitty people to kind of just keep classrooms going in whatever capacity they can. Now, this was obviously their plan was to bring in these outside scabs, but we stymied it in one pretty simple way. We got the SEIU 1021, I believe. Sorry if I messed that up. Our support workers union. So that's the security guards, cafeteria ladies, janitors. They had a sympathy strike with us, and same with the administrators. So the district is unable to get scabs in that magnitude now that we've removed also all the support staff and all the bosses from the equation. There's simply not enough people for them to fill that gap. Now, their other strategy to keep us off the picket line, which I found I would say distasteful if it wasn't so naive and unthought out, is we all got emails saying instead of we were legally required to report to a staff redeployment zone. So I was assigned to, I believe, Roosevelt. I would have had to go in 2.5 hours earlier than I usually go into work to a school site that is currently being picketed and just sit in a classroom. That's how they wanted to get people off the picket line. Like you'll get paid if you have to go cross a picket line of strangers several hours earlier and just sit in a dark room. Um, and the emails themselves, well, they didn't say it explicitly. They were, I think, sort of worded in the way they were going to try to trick people into thinking that, like, hey, striking's illegal. You got to go here and sit down. It didn't work. Um, uh, we had extra people show up early at those sites to picket and prevent scabbers from going through. I know PSL and DSA also sent out calls for volunteers to come show up. I don't know how that worked, but from a coworker of mine who showed up every day for those anti-scab pickets, it was fairly successful. Very few people went into there. So I think, again, it comes back to the boss's naivety about how they deal with this scene.
Thank you. Dale, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear how uh, y'all were dealing with scabs and stuff. I think like another thing that I heard was that they were sending out emails to parents and students, basically asking them to take online classes. while the strike was happening. Did you hear
Mhm.
about this? Like,
Yes.
what are your thoughts about this stuff?
So if the students signed up for that and did it on a day-to-day basis, it counted them as in class, meaning the district wasn't fined for that student. Again, we personally reached out to parents. We personally reached out to student organizations, especially in high schools. The students have been very organized for us, so they were able to spread the message of it. Hey, don't fucking do this. If you do this schoolwork, it undercuts your teachers. So again, we did more outreach programs, and I don't believe it really impacted us to a significant degree. Because again, you're asking kids to do homework from home. Why would?
Yeah, kids already don't want to do homework.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like to ask them to be like, hey, do homework and be a scab, then they're probably going to say no.
yeah.
Especially, it's good to hear that most of the students, especially the high schoolers, were aware enough of what was happening that they were like, we're definitely not going to do this. Not only because we wouldn't want to do it in the first place, but because this is just extra gross.
Hmm.
Um, I guess like my other question was like, what kind of like support were like different organizations or like community groups like providing to the teachers and the strikers? Like, how were different people showing up for the strike?
Um, we had a lot of bodies at our marches and rallies. I will say that first and foremost. Just the amount of people we were able to get just to march on City Hall like twice in a row. It's great. Um, there were a lot of food banks. The California Teachers Association, kind of our union federation, for the state is also quite helpful. And a lot of this strike wave recently has been pushed by them. So I'm quite happy with at least their program as a statewide organization. They offered interest-free loans if you needed them. And we had all our support unions also offer a sympathy strike, and they were out with us. So, and I cannot not mention how many restaurants were having like half off for teacher deals. Which I deeply appreciate. But yeah, there was a very strong community showing, including with the LA teachers. They sent their president up. Just a lot of good support from also other unions around the Bay Area. So I didn't really actually feel there was a single kind of sector that didn't support us beyond the obvious tech right.
Yeah, I think people really like teachers. So it's good that folks were really showing up in different ways to support the teachers and stuff. I'm curious too, like I know like a few years ago, I want to say in like 2019, when the Oakland teacher strike was happening, there was a
Hmm.
lot of different like strike support that was happening to ensure that like, students who would get like their only meal or two at schools would still
Hmm.
be able to get access to that. Were y'all trying to do any of that sort of stuff while the strike was happening? And what was that
Yes.
looking like?
Um, Obviously, I do not have a lot of rich students at my school, so and most of my students do rely on the meals I'm able to give them. So there were several community centers, and obviously the city, I can't say the city didn't help with this. And there were food banks set up, different kitchens, different kind of child care programming set out. And obviously, since this is a good thing, and we don't want to, because while we are a union of workers, I do feel like we do have some sort of responsibility for these children. We've been handing out flyers, instructing the parents about where to get these services. We're fully on board with kind of how the city wanted to distribute the services, especially because, unlike the district, the city themselves weren't going to try to undercut us and count them as like in attendance. So it wasn't rat fucking us in any way.
For sure. That's interesting to hear. Yeah, and I think that also like goes counter to the messaging that like the superintendent was like putting out there. Like
Hmm.
I know most of the people that I know were like just really disgusted at like the crocodile tears that she was showing and being like, just think of the students. And it's like, it's obvious that, like you care and a lot of teachers care and a lot of people in the
Hmm.
community care. And this wasn't like something that was just being thrown to the wayside. Obviously, there was like serious intention to try and still keep these services going, trying to
Hmm.
make sure that students are, having access to the meals that they get every day, while also like maintaining principles and like staying militant and being like, listen, like we have to fight for the things that we deserve, that we need. And like, I think also hopefully like to some extent, like exposing the fact that, this sort of lapse can only happen in a world where like teachers are really and schools are really dependent on all of these things happening and not like
Mhm.
ruffling feathers, when in reality it's like that's a huge problem.
I don't get enough food to feed my kids in the first place. Like there's so many burdensome rules. For quite a few days in the last few weeks, I've just been not able to get enough food to have a breakfast for every single one of my students. Like, if we're not even feeding them in the first place,
Yeah, very important point. So I want to move the conversation along a little bit to talk about the end of the strike of the tentative agreement and sort of what is the
mhm,
future for the United Educators of San Francisco with this new contract. Maybe just talk a little bit about how the strike ended and maybe a little bit about this discussion on this tentative agreement. Should folks
mhm.
accept the tentative agreement? Was there any type of rumblings against ending the strike early? Was there a contingent that was pushing for going further? I just want to talk a little more about that dynamic.
Mhm. So basically, we got them to the strike was 4 days long. I don't remember the exact timeline, but over the course of Tuesday and Wednesday, we got them to agree to our non-monetary items. That's sanctuary schools and allowing homeless children to sleep in the classroom. All the budgetary items kind of all collapsed on Thursday. On Thursday, like really early in the morning, from what the bargaining told me. Like the district just gave out all at once. So I think there was sort of a incentive to just accept that victory because they had just kind of collapsed in their attempt to provide opposition to negotiating. There were sectors that didn't think we'd gone far enough, and I agree. We didn't get the pay rises we wanted, but I think now that our union is kind of very freshly proven that we can win these strikes, extremely militant at this point, I am quite confident in union leadership to win it again for us in the next contract. So we got all the important non-financial stuff. We got the dependence healthcare. We got what's really important for me for a special education teacher, which is reduced workload and overpay if my workload is too much. So I think, yeah, next time I'm pretty confident, and I think the rest of the kind of rank and file is pretty confident in union leadership to pull it off again in the next contract negotiations.
Yeah, I think that's always the thing to look out for, right? Because
Hmm.
I'm somebody who's in the United Education of SF for the 4 years previously before last year, and I'm not confident in union
Yeah.
leadership to actually fight for its needs. Remember, it's been 40 years since there's been a
Hmm.
strike, right? And in the city, probably one of the most expensive cities in the United States of America, one of the most expensive
Hmm.
cities in the world, the struggle around pay increases is still in doubt, right? Like these are like, the basic bread and butter issues that like a Starbucks union is pretty clear on, right?
Hmm.
And so I think there's that interesting question around when to stop fighting. Because again, remember, United Educators of San Francisco is also announced the round of layoffs, right?
Hmm.
Oakland Unified, another attempt, the school that also, was threatening to strike, accepted a tentative agreement beforehand, managed to, before striking. Again, the district also announced I think, over 400 layoffs, right?
Yeah.
So they give a carrot and they still deliver a stick of
Hmm.
actually uh, uh, cutting teachers, right? Cutting
Yeah.
resources, right? So I think that's like the need for this continued militancy, right? Because I think there's that contradiction. Because I think from the leadership's perspective, they just want to end this unrest as quickly as possible, go back to the status quo, right?
Hmm.
And I think that, and I've talked about this before on the show, that oftentimes, these victories are sort of used as evidence that further victories are not possible. Like
Hmm.
I think that goes back to kind of like the economism of the trade union approach. It's like, okay, well, we want a little bit of money here. Do we really have the political will or the good sense to fight budgetary cuts, right? It's like, well, we got
Hmm.
pay raises. Can we really complain if they have to cut the budget, right? Not understanding that, these people throw away hundreds of millions of dollars just saying no to the teachers, right? The fact that they're fined, what was it, $7 million a day, right?
Hmm.
For when there is a strike, and their reticence to pay $150 million very quickly becomes just chump change, right? Over fines, right? There's
Hmm.
always enough money, right? There's always an ability to actually demand further from the capitalists. And I think it's that bit of clarity that trade unions, particularly like the more white collar trade unions, need to really understand that rather than kind of identify with the school board, right? I think that's the deeper issue with a lot of these white collar unions, educator unions, is more often than not, we view ourselves as synonymous with the district, which doesn't make any fucking sense because these people used to back slavery and segregation. Like, why do we identify
Mhm.
with these people? Right? I mean, it's interesting. I think how many, remember the United Educators of San Francisco, rather the San Francisco Unified School District, used to have and I think still does, has the highest disparity between administration and educators. I think it wasn't until long ago that the San Francisco United School District, had more administrators than LA Unified. To give you some comparison, San Francisco Unified has, I think, at that time was about 50,000 students, most likely less. LA Unified had 2 million students, but they have the same number of administrators, right? Meaning these people are just hoarding money. They're hoarding money, and the people who get cut first are the communities that are supposed to be served, and not these administrative leadership parasites. Yeah, and so I think it's hopeful that this militancy, it's the first militancy in almost 40 years that the United Educators of San Francisco has shown. The hope I really hope is that unions like this and unions around the country, and unions that have not even been formed yet, can actually look to this current period of labor organizing and actually take it forward to the next step. Hopefully, continue these struggles for economic gains, as well as maybe even put forward some political demands, which of course is explicitly illegal in the United
Mhm.
States of America, but that's another issue. Nyka, I know we're kind of winding down to the end of this discussion, so I'm curious if you had
Mhm.
any other closing thoughts. Dale, do you have any other closing thoughts before we wrap up this discussion?
It's interesting. I think you mentioned it's like the first militancy we've shown in 40 years, which is correct. But I think it's important to mention that we recently had a pretty big leadership change. PSL kind of took over the union. I don't believe the president is currently PSL, but the vice president and a lot of other major officers are. They ousted a very kind of moderate Lowell High School controlled union leadership. They actually cut union officer pay. They moved more of the budget towards member services, especially away from the chicken dinner circuit. Essentially, there's all these conventions, and they were sending teachers there for free vacations on just on our dime, and they've cut that down to only the minimum two, which I appreciate. So in the last few years, there has been a definite kind of left-wing takeover of the union. And from talking to members of leadership, there is simply no oppositional bloc. There's a few scattered Zionists, but they all have such divergent political opinions otherwise, they can't really offer any kind of opposition. So I think solid left wing, I don't even want to call it entryism because they were kind of just status quo liberals who really didn't even bother, uh, seemingly can be effective, even if it is unfortunately PSL.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you're bringing up. It's like, even though these unions haven't really played the role that they need to, they still can be working class organizations, working class institutions that can actually serve working class interests. And yeah, I think like pushing out, like you're saying, like pushing out this like kind of Lowell High School contingency, that's actually a really good thing because we've seen, what Lowell High School represents or
Mm-hmm.
has represented historically, which is just segregation and elitism and classism and a lot of really not great stuff. That's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think like yeah, like I think we're seeing in a lot of places in California, teachers either gearing up to strike or striking. It's like it happened here in San Francisco. There were talks in Oakland. They were striking in LA not too long ago. I'm pretty sure they're striking in Sacramento right now, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I think it's important that, people see this for what it is and really go out there and support it. And for all these different teachers unions in the state and the nation to really like try to come together around this stuff because this isn't just like isolated pockets here and there. It's like
Mm-hmm.
yes, San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities not just in the United States, but maybe even in the world. California is a huge economy. The United States is a huge economy. We have enough money to pay teachers, to actually take care of teachers, take care of the people, the students that they're serving, the communities that they're serving. And it's going to take, teachers and lots of other people coming together to really like push for that, in a militant and principled way. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nyka, for your time. It was great talking to you about the work that you and your comrades of the union have been doing. Is there anywhere that folks can? I don't know. We're not going to do the reach out part since you're kind of doing it anonymously of your school site. You normally like that plug.
Yeah, please don't come to my workplace.
Yeah, we were not going to do any of that. Don't worry about it. So yeah, again, just thank you so much for your time talking with us today. It's been an amazing discussion.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.